Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm going to be swatching the ABH Rose Metals palette for you. This is a 12-pan palette. It retails for $55 and it is the same format as the ABH Nouveau palette with the larger pan sizes and more product. In this video I'm going to be swatching each shade individually and describing the color, and then at the end of the video I'll give you an overview of all of the looks that I did with it. So out of the 12 shades, there are two true mattes. Those are Dune and Noble. They're both pretty dark shades. There's also some other mostly matte shades that are lighter. One of them is Ashes. The other one is Sunrose. They do have some very tiny sparkle in them. They aren't like the ColourPop matte with sparkles. The shimmer in this is much, much finer. It doesn't show up very much at all on the lid. The rest of the shades are shimmer and they do vary in their finishes. Some are closer to a satin finish, others are a mixture of shimmer and sparkle, and then a few of them are more of your metallic type of shades with larger particles that are highly reflective but aren't as opaque as a standard shimmer. I feel like as a whole, all of the shades in this palette are very smooth. None of them are dry, especially the mattes are very finely milled, very smooth. The shimmers have more of an emollient kind of feel to them. They aren't dry and dusty. And overall, I find color payoff very good with this palette. I have no complaints whatsoever. They are very easy to build up within just a few layers to get very full opacity. You can also apply these shades more sheer if that's what you like, and not have them look patchy at all. The first shade is Rose Quartz, and this is a light taupey pink. This is a satin finish and it has all fine particles. It's not a very reflective shimmer. It does reflect a little bit, but I'm able to kind of get away with using this as a one and done shade or using it in the crease. It doesn't have any noticeable fallout and it has a very smooth, almost emollient kind of feel to it. The next one is Royal, and this is a deep burgundy shimmer with some larger golden sparkle. This one is slightly more reflective than the last shade, and it has some noticeable fallout. It isn't terrible fallout, but do be careful and tap your brush off when using this one. The next one is Haze, and this is kind of like an almost greenish taupe. It has a higher reflection than the previous two shades. It's more metallic. It does have larger particles in it for the most part. There is some fine shimmer, but there's definitely a lot of large sparkle in this. And it needs maybe like an extra layer or two than the previous shade to get the same type of opacity. The next shade is Rose Fire, and this is a very similar texture to the previous one. It is kind of metallic, sparkly type of shade. There is some shimmer in it as well. This one is probably one of the warmest, if not the warmest shade in the palette. It is, it really stands out against the rest of them, especially on the eye. It has a very golden, bright, warm feel to it. It reminds me of sunlight. And the next shade is called Sunrose. This is a matte with sparkle. The sparkle in this is incredibly fine. It is hardly visible once it's on the eye and blended out. If you are somebody that notices fine detail, you will be able to see the sparkle, but from a normal distance, this one applies nearly the same as a matte shade would. This one has good color payoff. It blends out smoothly and easily, and there isn't any noticeable sparkle fallout. There probably is some, but it's so fine that it's very hard to see. The next shade is called Nova, and this is another shimmer that has a mixture of shimmer and sparkle. It is very similar to the finish of Royal. It's kind of a very warm golden olive The golden undertone is very strong in this, and I feel like it makes it a unique shade. The texture and finish and color payoff are also very similar to Royal. Next up is the shade Heavenly, and this is very similar in texture and finish to Haze and Rose Fire. It's very metallic and it has larger particles in it. There isn't much very fine shimmer in this. There's mostly large particles in it, but they are very reflective and they kind of scatter more than some of the other shimmers do, so it's kind of not as opaque. You can build it up to have that opaque metallic look if you want to. And this is just a white gold that is, on me, looks very neutral on the skin. Next up is the shade Element, and this is just a fine shimmer. There's no large sparkle in this. It's very smooth. It is not as shiny or reflective as the previous shade or Haze and Rose Fire that I swatched in the top row. It's a kind of a reddish copper, pretty deep, and it has very good color payoff. Next up is Ashes, and this is another matte with fine sparkle. There is even less sparkle in this shade than there is in Sun Rose. I use this for all intents and purposes as a matte shade. I use it in the crease, blend it out with a fluffy brush. I don't notice any sparkle fallout from it, and just looking in the mirror, the sparkle on the lid is hardly noticeable at all. If you take close-up photos, you can see the sparkle a little bit, but it's not that easy to notice. So this shade can be sheared out, and it will not look patchy. It looks even. I can also apply it heavily, and it will look a little bit deeper, but still also evenly applied. The next one is Dune, and this is an orangey, reddish, dark brown. This shade is a true matte, and I am able to use this also as a one and done, surprisingly, for how deep it is, because it stretches out very far and does not become patchy in the process of blending it out and shearing it out. It stays very even. This has a much warmer undertone than the next true matte that I'll swatch in a little bit. The two are not too close to each other, so that is nice. I don't recall any fallout from this shade. Next one is Nocturne, and this is another all fine shimmer shade, so there's no large sparkle in this, but it does have kind of a dimensional look to it once you apply it to the lid. This one is a grayish taupe. It's very cool toned, and it actually goes on pretty evenly. It doesn't look patchy or anything, and also don't recall any fallout from this shade. And the last one is Noble, and this is another true matte. This one is definitely much more neutral than the previous true matte, and it's still very warm, but it doesn't have a very obvious like reddish or orangey tone to it when it's sheared out. All right, so I just wanted to show you a few comparisons here. I don't have that many, but here is the Rose Metals next to the Nouveau palette. I feel like these are pretty complementary. It's a nice set of 24 neutrals if you have both palettes, and I don't feel like there's too much overlap in the shades. There are definitely some shades that are kind of similar to each other. There's a lot of neutral greenish shades, so like in Nouveau we've got Belle and Hope and even Wings that are kind of similar to Haze and Nova, and arguably Nocturne and Heavenly in the Rose Metals palette. Those are all sort of similar. They do vary a little bit in their how light and dark they are and the undertones. But they aren't, like, there's nothing in here that's like truly duping the other palette. I do like that if you were to have both, you've got a neutral matte, like a good neutral matte range that you can use from both palettes, and a couple of pops of color also. As far as quality, I feel like the quality in both of these palettes is nearly identical. The formula feels just the same between both palettes. The mattes are equally as smooth and blendable and finely milled, and the shimmers are, they do both have varying finishes of shimmer in both palettes, but I feel like they all are very emollient. None of them are dry. The fallout between both palettes is about the same, and overall they apply about the same way. Next up, I decided to pull out my Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 palette and put it next to this one. They both kind of have a similar theme, except that the Patrick Ta palette is very narrowly focused on a rosy, pinkish theme, whereas the Rose Metals is much more varied. It has neutrals and browns and oranges and a little bit of green. So it's a little bit more versatile. But if you very much want to focus on rosy tones, you might want to go with the Patrick Ta palette instead. The shimmers are very different between the two palettes. The Patrick Ta shimmers are... there's a lot of sparkly shimmers, and the sparkle, I think, is bigger in those shades than they are in the ABH palette. There is one in the Patrick Ta palette that is kind of a smooth shimmer, and it is that deep burgundy, which is very similar to the one in the ABH palette, except that the ABH palette burgundy has large sparkle in it, and the Patrick Ta burgundy does not. It is all fine shimmer. The quality of both shimmers is good. I do think that the ABH burgundy is slightly better quality. At least it's more consistent and easier to apply. But after they are both applied, they both kind of have a similar look to them. If I were to say I like the quality of one better than the other, I think I do like the quality just a hair better of the Patrick Ta eyeshadows. The mattes are kind of similar in the way that they blend and apply. They are very smooth and easy to stretch out and shear out along the edges in both palettes, and so that is good. I think that the Patrick Ta mattes are a little bit more forgiving if you have more mature eyelids or you've got some texture going on. They're very forgiving on that. And the shimmers are, there's a lot less fallout from the Patrick Ta eyeshadows. They adhere super, super well, even those large sparkly shades. They are very impressive with how little fallout they have. And finally, I pulled out some of my old e.l.f. quads to put next to this palette, mainly just to give you an idea of where the colors lie on the color range. I know a lot of people have these old e.l.f. palettes, so you can get an idea of like where the neutrals fall and how dark the shades are, and if you like the burgundy shade, like how burgundy is it compared to like I think it's the berry shade up in the top right corner that I have there. Quality-wise, ABH is far better than e.l.f. e.l.f. is not bad. These quads are actually pretty good for how cheap they are. But yeah, ABH is far better. And I just want to wrap this up by showing you all of the looks that I did with this palette. I want to thank you for spending your time with me here, and I will see you in the next one.